to the Gen Z show. I am your host, James McLamb, and I'm joined today by two co-hosts, Sarah Beth McLamb and Maddie Smith. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well.
Good.
Very good, very good. Well, today our guest was Miss Laila Downs from Iowa. Sarah Beth, tell us a little bit about Laila.
So Laila actually helped create a company called Point One Development, and her expertise within that company is really helping navigate personality in the workplace. She is a Hogan certified practitioner, and so she uses that along with Enneagram to help different people just navigate their personality and what that means. And so she's super passionate about helping people set vision for their life and just really develop tactics to achieve their vision.
I really enjoyed our time with her. She had a great insight into several topics. Maddie, what was one of the things that stuck out to you the most about our time with her today?
She was really emphasizing Enneagram types and basically the importance of understanding ourselves as people to become closer with ourselves, be closer with those we work with, and especially to be closer with those who we are good friends with and we're in really close relationships with. And I think something that she really brought an argument forward for the Enneagram type is very simple. You can start off and it's 1 through 9. There are simply 9 numbers and you lean one way or the other towards a wing, and you can go super in depth and learn more and more and understand how the different numbers tie together. And I think that's something that really stood out to me is, like she says, word for word, it can be as simple or as complex as you would like it to be. And I think that's something that we could all really walk away from, understanding that our personalities are super complex.
Listen, you're going to want to learn more about personality assessments based on this interview. And if you want to find out more information about Laila, you can look down in the show notes below and you can see all the information on how to get in touch with her and how to connect with her both on Facebook and Instagram and on her website. But before we go to the interview, if you haven't already done it, go down to the right portion of this screen right now, click on our icon and subscribe to this channel, and then share this episode with your friends as well, because they need to hear this just as much as you do. But right now, let's get straight to our interview with Miss Laila Downs. Laila, welcome to the Gen Z show. I want to thank you for agreeing to be our guest today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I was really excited when our mutual friend Rachel reached out to me and said, hey, this is someone you need to interview. You're going to like what she has to say, and she's going to bring a lot of value to the program. And actually tomorrow, the day that we're recording this, tomorrow we're going to be replaying one of Rachel's episodes on the Gen Z show as well. So it's kind of
oh, cool.
Yeah, a little bit of synergy going on there. So now for our audience, some of our audience may know you, but many of them may not be familiar with you. So if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and share a little bit of the things that you would like our audience to know about you.
Sure. Thank you. I'm Laila Down. I am originally from Oklahoma, a small town in Oklahoma, somewhat small, I guess you could say, just north of Oklahoma City. I got my undergraduate degree from Texas Tech University in agricultural education. Then I got a master's degree a little bit later from Iowa State, also in agricultural education. And a little bit about my professional background. Right out of college, I went and I worked for Syngenta, a global seed and chemical company. I sold to retailers and farmers, did that for just over 3 years. Loved that job, loved being an ag, being on the the sales force, the ground level of a company. That was awesome. A great way to enter into the professional world. After that, I went and I sold advertising for Meredith, specifically Successful Farming Magazine, agriculture.com, and I worked with agencies on that front. After that, I taught high school agriculture for a year in Des Moines. My heart was always inner city students and allowing agriculture to open up a new world for them, a new opportunity, much like it did for me. Like, I didn't come from an ag background, but FFA changed my life because I got pulled into it. And so I did that for a year. And in that stint, somewhere in there, I also went to grad school full time and did that. And so after I taught high school agriculture, I ended up pregnant with my first. My husband and I had our first. And in that time, I realized that I had been speaking on the side for a really long time, like 10 plus years. And my husband was like, hey, if this is your passion, this is what you want to do, like it's now or never. And so we made that moment happen then about 5 years ago. My best friend, Rachel Kagi, and I launched Point One Development. And we had that company together for about 4 years. And then after that time, Rachel started Rachel Kagi Consulting and Coaching, and she does that full time. And then I just kept Point One, where I do speaking, facilitation, and executive coaching.
So one of the things that we discussed before the call started that you really like training people on is personality types. And we know there are, dozen maybe different types of personality profiles. I mean, some people have heard of the major ones and stuff. And I got a feeling that a lot of young people get tired of hearing, oh, you got to know what your personality is. You got to know what your strengths are. You got to know all of this stuff. But to reaffirm this to them, what do you see as the value of a young person knowing what their personality type is, or at least an assessment to give them an idea?
Yeah, so I became passionate about personality early on in life. Like my mom was a single mom, and I have thought back, when did I start becoming really interested in personality? I think it was my mom was a single mom, and to be quite honest, I'm a pretty authentic and transparent person. Like she dated all these people, and I can remember thinking like, can I trust this person? Do I like this person? And like they just sort of came in and out of my life, and I really started to assess people on their personality. And I think that that really depicts why it's so important, because our personality and understanding others people's personality is really the lens by which we see everything. You know, our personality is how we navigate relationships. It's how we become successful. I know, early on in FFA, I knew I wanted to serve as a state FFA officer, and I thought in the back of my mind, that'd be really cool if I could be a national officer, but I just sort of thought that wasn't in the cards for me. And being able to better understand my personality, my skill set, have some self-awareness, it better positioned me to get elected as a state officer. Fully understanding my personality and who I am and why I'm wired the way that I am and how I'm wired the way that I am enabled me to go through a very, very in-depth, comprehensive interview process to be able to eventually be elected to serve as a national FFA officer. And so, of course, the relationships that we have and the way that we interact with the people around us, but understanding our personality and the personalities around us better equip us to experience career success. And if you want success in your life, like you're going to have to know yourself and the people around you. And the key to that is personality, I believe anyway. It's just really understanding how we're wired, why we're wired that way, and what does that tell us about how we should interact with the people around us.
So the value, as you see it, is not always just knowing about yourself, but being able to assess others as well so that you can form better relationships with them.
Totally. That's totally it. And just having self-awareness. I remember I was a state FFA officer. I was also in a sorority. I'm a Chi Omega. I was top 50 freshman. I was in President's Leadership Council. I was in Ag Council. Freshman I was doing everything my freshman year of college. And at one point, my team members were all at one of our other team members' trailers in Stillwater. I started my college career at Oklahoma State. And I walked in the door and I thought it was odd that everyone had beat me to the team meeting. And they sat me down there like, hey, Laila, we're not really quite sure how to tell you this, but we need to tell you this. Like, you're not very much fun to be around. Like, you're clearly stressed. You've got too much going on, and you've basically been a grouch, like in a bad way. And that was just a part of my personality that I had to learn. Like, I have to manage my time more appropriately. I had to scale back. I couldn't do as much as maybe I thought I could. And one part of my personality is I oftentimes think that I'm more capable than I actually am. And I had to have peers who loved me and who knew that I could receive that information, set me down and help me do that. And I learned something super huge about me and my personality. And I knew my team members around me well enough, and I knew that they loved me, that I was in a place to receive that. But again, I adjusted. I made an adjustment. I made a change, and it was for the better, and my relationships grew as a result. And so the more that we can take in information and start to piece together parts of who we are and how we interact with the world around us, the more abundant our relationships will be, and the better we can show up for the people around us.
Mm. I really like that. I really like that on personality. And one of the assessments that you like to use is Hogan and Enneagram. Is that correct?
Yes, the Hogan assessment is what I use with a lot of senior level leaders, some individual contributors, and some younger in their career top talent type folks. And it's an assessment that helps us understand your strengths, also understand your values and your motives, but where we really have the expertise is in our derailers. So I just gave you an example of a derailing part of my personality when I'm under a lot of stress. And so what I'm able to do is help people identify those derailers that come out, those parts of our personality that come out when we're under a lot of stress, or maybe we're not self-monitoring. And then we help people, I specifically help people and coach them to develop some strategic self-awareness to improve their reputation in the workplace so that they can eventually have more career success and enable more success on their teams. I also love to use the Enneagram, and it's something that I've started to weave into all of my coaching. I use it with senior level executives. I use it with individual contributors. I'm gonna experiment with using it with some state FFA officer teams that I coach, because I think it is the most comprehensive, full picture personality. I really won't call it an assessment, but just personality platform that allows us to understand ourselves and the world around us. Like, I just think it's so telling and full picture. It's like, it's so simple, but it's also so complex. And that's why I like to use the Enneagram. And I love it because I can weave it into Hogan or strengths. And having worked with Rachel, who's a Gallup certified strengths coach for so long, I can't help but understand people's strengths and leverage some of that insight too. But I'm nowhere near the expert in strengths that Rachel is. So.
So you said that around college, some high school and growing up, you were really interested in personality. How did you figuring out maybe what your Enneagram is, what your personality is, how did that change how you interacted with those around you? How did that change like any part of your life? Like, what impacted you from knowing that about yourself?
Boy, gosh, that is totally a loaded question because, I read the book, The Road Back to You. Are either of you familiar, or any of you familiar with the book? Okay, so Suzanne Stabile and another gentleman wrote, I'm like a big Suzanne Stabile fan. She's probably where I get all of my Enneagram wisdom from. I follow her. She has a podcast called The Enneagram Journey that I highly recommend. And this book, The Road Back to You. And I read this book when I first started my Enneagram journey. And spoiler alert, I'm an 8, which is a challenger. It's you too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, when you were talking about the little encounter you had, I was flashing back to my college days, and I'm like, I think we're alike. At least she's a D. I'm a disc coach. So I was like, at least she's a D. I know that. So.
Yeah. So I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. So I started reading through this book, and what really struck me is understanding 8s as children and who we are as children. And I remember I was traveling to or from Iowa or Oklahoma. Iowa's where my husband and I live now. And I didn't mention him in the introduction, but Kevin, he's from Iowa. We have 3 little girls, Audrey, Ella, and Gentry. So if you hear running throughout my house, it is 3 toddlers. They're 4, 2, and 1. Anyhow, we were traveling to or from Iowa and Oklahoma, and I was like sobbing in the front seat reading this book. I mean, like full on ugly crying, because it just resonated with me so much. And I hadn't had an assessment read me so clearly. And so how did that impact me? It really has changed the way that I look at everything. And I hate even saying that, because I actually get annoyed with people who believe that a personality assessment is like the end all be all. I definitely don't think that. I believe that there's so many other parts. My faith, I believe, is truly the end all be all. And I believe that God uniquely wired me, and there's so much more to that than what a personality assessment can tell me. But I've not had any encounter like this. And so how did it change everything? I started to understand where I go to in stress, right? Where 8s go to in stress and where we go to in health. And 8s go to like a 5, which is a little bit more reclusive, a little bit more, they tie inward a little bit more. They're more protective of their time. They don't have as much energy as they normally would. And then I started to identify where I am in health, right? You look like a 2 or a helper. And I started to, what it helped me do is to see oh my gosh, these tendencies that I thought were just me, they're actually parts of me that are either in stress or in health. And I kind of started to understand how I operate in those two things. And it's helped me to know, I'm thinking that this is just part of my personality, but in fact, I'm in some stress and I'm retreating a little bit. What do I need to do with this information now? And of course, it's allowed me to bug my husband incessantly about figuring out what his number is. And so that's been kind of fun.
That's so cool. I remember, so I took Enneagram this past year I took it like 4 times. But I remember the first time I took it, and I wish I could remember what number it was, but it's escaping me at the moment. But I remember just reading through the list of characteristics and like tendencies and stuff. It was like, I thought I was just kind of crazy for doing that, but it turns out like I'm stressed out, or this is like who I am, like it's okay. And I thought that was so cool. So for anyone who was to take any sort of personality test, what do you think is the benefit for them? Like, why should they take it? If that makes sense. Like, is there a benefit in taking it just at any age, or should they retake it like I did? Or what do you think the strategy there is?
Yeah, so I follow Suzanne Stabile's train of thought in this. And again, if you don't know her, totally look up her podcast. And I don't believe that you need to take an assessment in order to identify your number. I do think it's helpful for some people who would never even begin this exploration to do an assessment. And if you're going to do it, I highly recommend the Ready, which is through the enneagraminstitute.com. It's $12, but it's probably the most founded and researched one out there, just to kind of get your wheels turning. But I recommend people just start to read about it, to follow podcasts about it. If they feel like maybe they're 1 or 2 different numbers and they can't decide, listen to a couple of podcasts and hear other people that are maybe a number 9 talk about being a number 9, or a number 7 talk about being a number 7, to help you decide, is that my number? Is it not? And you'll start to kind of sort through that. Some people, it takes a year to truly identify what their number is. And I would hate for someone to walk around thinking, I am so a 7 when in fact you're an 8, or I'm so a 1 when in fact you're a 3, because there's so much to those different numbers that you just want to make sure that you're tied into the right number. And so there's benefit in taking assessments, but really I'm more of a fan of just some good old digging and research, or talking to someone like me to help you figure it out. I
know you talked about having that big aha moment, and you really felt that impact, and it really resonated with you. And for me personally, I can say I've felt that a lot with different personality types, but it's always a little bit different. So what do you think is really the thing that makes the Enneagram assessment stand out compared to some of the other personality inventories?
Well, I think what makes the Enneagram different and highly beneficial is that it's deceptively simple. Like, you're a number, right? And that's easy. Like, I'm a 9, I'm a 3. There's only 9 numbers to choose from. So it's very, very simple to identify with one. It makes it kind of basic. But then the more that you dive into it, it can really get complex, and as complex as you want it to be. Whereas, there are some assessments that, like, nothing wrong with DISC, I love DISC, but there's a base of information that you get from doing that assessment. You get this packet, and you can work with a coach or something to learn more. With the Enneagram, it's almost unending whenever you think about all the different ways that the numbers tie together. And so I feel like it's one of the better ones, especially for people who aren't super deep into their career yet and are really more so on a journey of knowing self. And so I feel like it's more fitting, and I'm saying that as someone who makes the bulk of my living through the Hogan assessment, which is I paid to be certified in, and you have to pay a lot of money in order to understand your derailers, right? And the Enneagram is totally free and accessible out there, and I love it because you can go on Instagram and read through like Enneagram Ashton's post or something, right? And like learn more about the numbers if you want to, and I like the accessibility of it. The caveat to all of that is don't oversimplify it, because there's so much more to it, and you'll miss out if you leave it just to some Instagram post, or just to saying I'm a 4 and whatever, and just leaving it at that, because there's so much more to dive into there.
I like how you talk about it is simple, but then it gets super complex. And that's one thing I really enjoy too, because we don't really want to put our personalities in a box, as you've also said, and at least some of the online assessments I've taken, it shows you different percentages of each type. And I don't understand the wings super well, but I know that is also another level that's one step deeper. So I that really resonates with me how you say that. And maybe you could even explain the wings as well.
Yes, this is something that I get inwardly worked up about. Not really outwardly, but inwardly. I'll like see posts on Facebook or Instagram or something, and they're like, I'm a 4 with a 9 wing, and I'm like, no, you're not, because you're a number. So say you're let's take a friend of mine.
Use us. Do the 8s.
Okay, well, of course, as an 8, we would want us to do the 8, but I'm going to be a good coach and not use an 8. I'm going to use a 9. It would be like least assuming and not want me to use them. So let's say you're a 9. You're either an 8 wing or a 1 wing, right? Because if you look at the Enneagram diagram, and it looks kind of scary at first, and I was like, excuse me, what is this? But then I realized that it's not satanic or scary or anything. It's just like a really old school way of looking at personality. Let's say you're 9, which is at the top of the Enneagram. Your wing is either an 8 or a 1. Like you have an 8 or a 1 wing, and that means that you just have tendencies that lean toward either of those numbers. And that's what I love about it, because you're not just one number. You're not a single note, right? Some people have lots of dimension to them, and someone can be an 8 who's a 7 wing with a ton of energy, super energetic, but then maybe an 8 with a 9 wing who's more cares more about harmony and is a little bit more low key, right, than an 8 with a 7 wing. And so that's the big thing about wings, is think about it as a bird, either on the left or the right, like they're close to each other, they marry next to each other. And then again, you figure that out just by figuring out which of those numbers resonates with you more, which of those tendencies and habits do you feel like you have more of, and then that's your wing.
What, just for my curiosity, what are you? What would you say your wing is? 9 or 7?
Definitely a 7. I have learned, they say, I've heard it said that you are 1 wing the first half of your life and the other wing the other half of your life. And for the bulk of the people who are on this call, they haven't reached that transition point yet. So you're probably just 1 wing. But I'm starting to see more of myself that has gone, I totally would have always told you an 8 with a 7 wing. The older I get, the more I really do feel like I'm an 8 with a 9 wing. And I think it's just part of the phase of life that I'm in with kids. I want harmony. I want more peace. I need stillness more often. That's just more in me. And so probably truly an 8 with a 7 wing, but I definitely have some 9 wing tendencies too. Maybe that's because my 3 girls yell at each other all the time, and I'm like, please just get along. Words, not whining.
I see, like, on Instagram too, there are a lot of different memes or videos where they'll make fun of the personality types, and I think that is one of the greatest ways to do informal assessments.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, there's like one, it's like all the Enneagram types in quarantine, or all the Enneagram types in a friendship, and so those are really fun to watch too.
Yeah, totally. Quarantine was especially early on in quarantine, there were tons of good ones that was really, really funny to watch. But yeah, it's awesome. I think the other thing too is like one of the big themes that you can start to identify. There's 2 big themes that I at least identify is like energy and order. Like what brings you energy, what drains your energy, how do you get order, and what creates disorder for you. And each number is wildly different, and it's super, super complex. Then you can just like think about the feeling triad, the anger triad, right? The gut triad. Like you can start to understand what is your natural reaction. So for those of us that are either 8, 9s, or 1s, for instance, like you're in the anger or feeling triad. And so your first natural reaction is typically anger, which sounds really weird, like, because you're like, I'm not an angry person. I'm actually a really happy person. An example of that is like today. My husband left water in the mop bucket whenever he mopped the garage. He's a 1. Only a 1 would mop the garage. So that's probably because I painted and dusted and like sanded our cabinets in there, but I digress. And I was so annoyed. Like my first visceral reaction was like, annoyance, right? And that's just kind of your gut reaction, like the way that you interpret things right away. For me, it's very much on the forefront. For a 9, it may be super, super internal, where you have that feeling, but you stuff it down because you're not going to, feel anything that will disrupt your harmony. And so it's just really cool whenever you really start to dive into it, especially if you work with someone who super knows what they're talking about and can help you understand those things. It's just, who doesn't like to think about how they're wired,
In preparation for this, I was watching I'm sorry, Sarah. I was watching a video from Ian Crom where he was describing the different personalities from Enneagram, and I was listening to an 8. And when you said, we react with anger, one of the things that he said was, and 8s are always surprised when people say, hey, are you angry? And you're like, no, I'm not angry. I mean, I'm never angry, but the way you react, people interpreted it that way. Even though for us, we're not, no, I'm not angry. It's kind of like the old, what show was Incredible Hulk, where the guy says, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. You wouldn't like us if we're angry. What you're seeing is just our natural way. We're not angry. Don't get us angry. So.
Yep. Yeah. Or better yet, don't hurt me, because that is real anger. Like, that's true. Like, that will read to you more angry than any of my actual anger. And that's what's also kind of unique, is you start to unpack these things about people that you're like, oh, that's why you're wired. I mean, even Rachel and I, who were business partners and best friends, there were so many complications in our relationship because we owned a business together that we didn't understand about each other. And once we got the Enneagram, we're like, oh, this isn't personal. Like, this isn't an attack on me or an attack on, the situation. Like, this is just how we're naturally wired. This are just tendencies of our personality. And it made things so much less personal to know that it wasn't just Laila who's like this, or it's not just Rachel who needs a lot of harmony in order to get things done. Like, that's just her personality type. And when you can make it a lot less personal, it makes your relationships so much more rich. Like, you can strip back some of that stuff that makes relationships kind of sucky sometimes, and realize, like, hey, this is just the way that we're wired, and it's not an attack on me.
You ever get envious of those people who seem like they just have an innate ability to understand these concepts without having to be taught them? It's just like there's some people who can assess people's personalities without having learned about Enneagrams or DISC or Briggs or, any of that stuff. They just know that stuff. I mean, those people to me just are just amazing. I just don't understand, how do they know this stuff?
Gifting, spiritual gifting of maybe discernment. I don't know. Or if you're in strengths, maybe they get the talent of individualization or something, There's tons of ways that we're gifted.
So I'm curious, you said in your introduction about yourself and your pathway to kind of where you are now, that you majored in agricultural education. You were able to teach for a few years, and you've had all these different job opportunities with speaking and training and agricultural sales and stuff. So I'm actually in agricultural education right now. So I was like super happy. I had like an internal grin whenever you said that. But I'm curious, how do you think, I don't know how deep you were into personality when you were teaching, but looking back, whether you were or you weren't, how did that impact your relationship with your students, or how you viewed relationships with like your business partners or who you were working with? Like, how did that benefit you? Like, understanding personality, or looking back, how would that change how you interacted with students or the people who you work with?
Yeah, so I believe that it impacted the people I work with more so than my relationship with my students. And the reason is because I put my relationship with my students on a different level than I did with the people that I worked with. And what I mean by that is my students got an immeasurable amount more grace and just a pass in terms of personality, way more than anyone I ever worked with, because I worked with adults, and my students were like, treasures to me. And so how I use personality with them, I didn't necessarily use any assessments or anything. I just met students where they were as they walked in the door. And that's one thing that I did learn in teaching, is that high schoolers are still trying to figure out so much of who they are and who they want to show up as every single day, that it was more important for me to understand myself and how I'm wired and how I can be as consistent of a role model to them as possible as they're trying to navigate life. And especially the school that I taught in, or really any school for that matter. I mean, and rural schools are starting to be just the same way, but my students were showing up food insecure, really difficult home lives. So their personalities changed on a dime all the time, right? Because that's just the way of life for young people, especially with social media and all the other stuff that students deal with nowadays. And so I use personality most with myself. I also used it in terms of how I worked with my principals, all of our administrators, how I navigated really difficult conversations about the classroom and about my students' needs. And then definitely I used it most in my relationship with Rachel as a business partner, when we were trying to make so many different decisions about finances, taxes, client relationships, proposal documents, how we're going to do invoices, like anything under the sun that you can think of. That's when it really mattered, is how are we going to navigate these things together. And then really the relationships, which if we think about it, is so much more important, like the relationships with my husband, with my mom, with my brother, with my best friends. That's when I use it the most. And again, it's really inward. Like I use it more for myself, to understand myself better, my blind spots, my derailers, so that I can navigate those relationships with the best version of myself as much as possible. And then knowing what to do when I don't show up with the best version of myself.
Well, go ahead, sir.
So I thought I was muted, but I wasn't, so I didn't say anything at first. No, that's what we talk about teaching wise all the time. Like you meet students where they are, and I think that's so cool. And I feel like that's really applicable to anyone that you come in contact with, is understanding yourself. And I love how you said that, is understanding myself helps me have an impact on other people and meet them where they are. And I thought that was so cool. So I have one more follow-up question to that, was what do you think is I don't want to say the benefit, but what is the most important thing that you can do to understand yourself so that you can have a positive impact on other people's lives? So let's say you don't take a personality test, or maybe you do research wise, what's the best thing that you can do for yourself to understand yourself and then have an impact on other people?
Pause. This is going to sound weird, but it's to pause. In our world today, we do not allow time for pause. We are so on to the next on almost everything that we don't take time to pause. And more specifically, pause after instances where we maybe don't show up as our best self, like where we hurt a friend, or we are careless with a school assignment, and maybe it was that was out of character for us. When we do something that's unnatural or didn't seem quite right, or where we hurt someone else, or we said something that didn't seem like it was us. Like, you ever say something, you're like, that is not normal. Pause and ask yourself, what just happened here, and why did that happen? And then you ask yourself, am I stressed, or was that just a moment where I wasn't thinking? And then if you're stressed, then you have to ask yourself, what am I stressed about, and what do I need to do about it? And just taking time to think about those things, especially when it comes to our relationships. When I was in high school, college, that was a hard time for my relationship with me and my mom, because I was a teenage girl and she was my mom, right? It's just the way of the world, right? Teenage girls and moms sometimes don't always get along. And there would be instances where I would maybe say something to my mom and then walk away and just be like, why did I do that? An example of this, not too long ago, my 2-year-old, I was taking her to bed, and my husband goes, all right, Ella, can I have a hug? And she goes, no. And then he was like, okay, are you sure? It kind of hurts Daddy's feelings. She was like, no. And then he walks out of the room, and then she kind of gets really sad, and she goes, Mommy, I'm sad. And I was like, why? She goes, I wanted to give Daddy a hug. That was out of character for her. That was not normal. She was just being sassy. And sometimes we do things like that. And so, I think just we need to take a pause and think about what got me here, and how do I not go back there again? And if I do, what am I going to do to pull my shoulders back and reset? So pause and reset. The thing is like more often than not, we know the answer. We just don't take the time to think about it. Like I have a very Socratic approach to things. Like we know the answer within us if we just take the time to think about it. And we just have to do that. Especially our culture is begging for us to do that today.
Wow. That's quotable right there. We need to see hashtags when this episode comes out. I want to see hashtags with that on it from our audience. If our audience wanted to connect with you, learn more about what you do, connect with you, learn how to work with you, where can they find you? How do they connect with you?
Yeah, so the easiest, gosh, I'm going to sound so in my 30s by saying this, but the easiest way is point1development.com. All my information to reach out to me personally, like if you email go on point1development.com and email someone, like it comes to me. Like there's not a team of people doing that. Like that's just me. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Laila Down. Those are my two arenas that I play in, if you will. So Facebook or Instagram, and then point1development.com.
What you mean? That makes you sound like you're in your 30s.
I should be like Snapchat and TikTok. I actually have a friend who has over 1 million followers on TikTok. Isn't that so cool? Mike Shields. I wish I knew Mike's TikTok handle, but Mike Shields. He does.
How do you get over 1 million followers?
He does trick shots. Like everything he does. He's actually been on. There's a TV show that is like featuring people who do like basically TikTok and all that sort of stuff, and he was on it recently. It's like it was a primetime show. He's in my church community group actually that my husband and I host, and he's just a stellar dude, and you would never know, but he's a wealth manager, but he's doing all these like really crazy trick shots. Like he did like this golf ball in these solo cups, like hit one off of a golf club. He did like another one just by like kicking it in or something. Like it's really funny. But Mike Shields, I wish I knew his TikTok handle, but well, we digress. Anyhow,
well, Laila,
that's not me, is what I'm saying.
It's not me either. So, and I'm a little bit older than 30, just a little bit. So, Laila, thank you for being our guest today on the show, providing us with some insight, not only just on Enneagram, but the power of understanding who you are and being able to understand how that you can connect with others as well. I really do appreciate you sharing with us and bringing that kind of value to it. Ladies, anything from you guys? Y'all can nod if you want to.
It was definitely really insightful, especially talking about the wings and kind of some more of the details and that insight that it can be as thorough and complex as you'd want it. So I really appreciated that key takeaway for me.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. I appreciate it.
Well, I really learned a lot about all of it too. I wanted to say thank you for that. I can't even remember my Enneagram number. I think it's a 3, but it might not be.
Yeah, you're 3. So.
Yeah, I think it is.
Or at least that's what I think.
It was so cool just learning about all of it.
Sweet. Well, thanks, ladies, and thanks, James. I appreciate it. It's been really fun.
And join us every week, Gen Z audience, for another exciting guest, and make sure you subscribe to the show. Thank you.